You wake up feeling tired. Again. You've slept 7 hours, maybe 8. You're eating well, exercising, even taking breaks during the day. But something still feels heavy, like gravity itself has increased. People say rest more, but you've tried that. This isn't just physical fatigue, it's deeper. It's in your bones, your soul. And what if I told you you're not lazy, weak, or broken? You're undergoing a process your conscious mind doesn't fully understand. A spiritual restructuring Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And what is pain, if not a sign that something old is being broken down to make room for something real? This exhaustion you feel may not be the kind that sleep can fix. It may be the exhaustion that comes from the slow death of a false self, the persona you've worn for years finally collapsing under its own weight. The persona, Jung taught, is not inherently bad. It helps you function in society, say the right things, smile politely, follow the script, but over time, if you over-identify with that mask, you forget who you are beneath it. And the longer you play that role, the good son, the perfect employee, the always smiling friend, the more your inner world rebels. It whispers, then aches, then screams. That scream often shows up as tiredness, not the tiredness of the body, but of the soul. Let me tell you about Jordan, a 42-year-old team leader I met during a workshop. From the outside, he had everything: a stable job, a wife who adored him, 2 kids, a beautiful home, but he would fall asleep at his desk. Not because of lack of sleep, but because he said, "I feel like I'm living someone else's life." His laughter didn't reach his eyes. His presence flickered like a faulty light bulb. When we spoke, I asked him one question. When was the last time you did something that felt like you? He couldn't answer. His exhaustion wasn't from parenting or work. It was from decades of silencing his inner voice to play a role that earned him approval, but drained his essence. And here's where Jung's idea of the shadow comes in. The parts of you you've denied, your anger, your ambition, your creative fire, don't disappear. They wait. And suppressing them takes energy. Every day you deny your truth, your body has to carry the weight of that denial. You smile when you want to scream. You say yes when your gut says no. You keep peace on the outside while chaos brews inside. No wonder you're tired. There's a mystery here, a kind of dramatic irony. You think you're exhausted because you're failing, but in truth you're exhausted because you're transforming. You think you're breaking down. But what's actually happening is that the self, your authentic essence, is beginning to emerge. And it needs space that was once filled with people-pleasing, perfectionism, and fear of being misunderstood. You're not tired because you're doing life wrong. You're tired because your inner world is rearranging the furniture. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming who you really are. But becoming yourself means undoing decades of programming, letting go of masks, owning your shadow, grieving your illusions. It's not a peaceful process. It's violent, messy, and slow. That's why you feel like you've been hit by something invisible. Because you have. You've been hit by your truth. You are tired because your soul is rebuilding itself from the inside out. You're not tired because of what you do. You're tired because of what you hide. There is a secret version of you living beneath your everyday thoughts, angry, ashamed, needy, envious. You keep this version of yourself buried, masked behind politeness, smiles, and carefully crafted identities. Carl Jung called this hidden self the shadow, the collection of traits, impulses, and desires we deny in ourselves but see all too clearly in others. And here's the cruel truth. Ignoring it doesn't make it go away. It makes it stronger, heavier, and eventually it wears you down like invisible chains you carry day and night. Have you ever felt exhausted after a simple conversation? or drained after being around someone who triggers you, even though they didn't do anything dramatic. That's not social fatigue, it's shadow confrontation. When someone brings out the part of you that you're still rejecting, your inner defenses go to war. You judge them, dismiss them, blame them, anything but look inward. This process eats your energy from the inside, because shadow work isn't rest. It's combat, and it's internal. Take Matthew, a 40-year-old project manager. Everyone saw him as composed and logical, but he couldn't stand one particular teammate. Ben, a younger, expressive, impulsive guy who constantly joked in meetings, Matthew called him unprofessional and frequently clashed with him. It wasn't until therapy that Matthew realized the truth. Ben reminded him of who he used to be before years of emotional repression. The loudness, the joy, the freedom, it triggered a grief in Matthew that he had buried so deeply he didn't even recognize it. Every argument wasn't with Ben, it was with a version of himself he had sentenced to silence. That realization broke him and freed him. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is why facing your shadow is so tiring. It strips away your illusions. You don't get to be the nice one, the strong one, or the logical one anymore. You have to sit with your rage, your jealousy, your need to be seen. And none of that is comfortable, but it is real. And the moment you stop running from it, your real healing begins. Dramatic irony is everywhere. The leader who criticizes others for being weak secretly fears their own vulnerability. The parent who demands perfection from their child is haunted by their own failure. The friend who constantly plays the rescuer is terrified of being abandoned. We all act out our shadows unless we bring them into the light, and when we don't, the exhaustion is relentless because we're not just living our lives. We're suppressing an entire emotional ecosystem behind a fragile mask. Eventually, the mask cracks, not because you let it, but because you can't hold it anymore. You snap at someone, you cry for no reason, you overreact or go numb or feel a strange emptiness where your fire used to be. That's the shadow whispering, "I'm still here," and it won't go away until you acknowledge it. So the next time you feel tired, truly soul-deep tired, don't ask, "What's wrong with me?" Ask instead, "What have I buried?" Because your exhaustion is the price of digging up what you buried long ago. You don't realize how heavy a mask is until it slips. That polite smile you wear, the calm tone you keep, the "I'm okay" you whisper, even when you're not. They all begin as tools for survival. Jung called it the persona, the social mask you wear to meet the expectations of others. At first, it's useful. You adapt, you navigate your job, your family, your friendships. You present the version of yourself that others will accept. But then, something strange happens. The mask doesn't come off, not even when you're alone. And over time, you forget that it's a mask at all. Jung warned of this danger. The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. The danger isn't in having a persona. It's in believing you are the persona. You become the role, the responsible son, the dependable employee, the strong one who never complains, but underneath that role is someone else. Someone raw, emotional, conflicted, even broken. And the longer you suppress that self, the more spiritual exhaustion builds up inside you. Not from work, not from responsibility, from pretending. Let me tell you a story. There was a man named Raymond, mid-40s, vice president of a tech firm, always the one to calm meetings, fix client messes, keep the team positive. His reputation, flawless. Until one morning, during a regular Zoom call, someone asked a simple question. "Raymond, how are you really holding up?" And to everyone's shock, He began to cry. Not a few tears, sobs. Months of burnout, isolation, the death of his father, and a failing marriage had all been buried beneath a professional smile. He hadn't even told himself the truth. His persona had held it all together until it couldn't. That collapse wasn't weakness. It was awakening. For the first time in years, Raymond began to speak as himself, not the role. And that shift, it was terrifying. Because when the mask slips, you have no script, you fumble, you stutter, you feel naked in rooms where you once felt powerful. But that is the beginning of something real. The collapse of the mask is not the end of your strength, it's the beginning of your authenticity. The real you is being born. But just like a newborn, that real self is vulnerable. And carrying that fragile truth into a world that wants the mask back. That's why you're so tired. There's dramatic irony here. Most people applaud your surface. The calm, the capable, the unbothered. But they don't see the nightly collapse. The quiet sobbing in your car, the way your hands tremble after long meetings. They only see the performance. And the tragic part? Sometimes, so do you. You confuse your act for your identity. And when the act breaks down, you panic, thinking you're breaking, but you're not. The act is, the mask is falling, and behind it is the person you've forgotten to be. This moment, this breakdown, it is not failure. It's the beginning of individuation. The process Jung described as becoming who you truly are, not what the world expects. And yes, it is exhausting. Not because you're weak, but because you're finally carrying something real. And real things have weight. So if you've ever had a moment where someone seemed perfectly fine one day, only to unravel the next, remember, they weren't fine. They were just very good at wearing their mask. And maybe, just maybe, that mask needed to fall. You don't notice the shift until it's already happened one day. Someone you knew inside and out returns. But they're not quite who they were. Their silence feels thicker, their eyes deeper. They speak less, but somehow say more. It's not madness, it's metamorphosis. Let me tell you about Amir. Everyone loved him at work. He was the guy who remembered birthdays, volunteered for the hard stuff, stayed late so others could go home early. Calm, consistent, safe. He wore the perfect mask, what Jung would call the persona, that socially acceptable version of ourselves, crafted to survive in the world. But few knew the truth. Amir's identity was glued together by the quiet approval of one man, his father. A man who never said, "I'm proud of you," but whose silence Amir interpreted as a challenge. A test, one he was always trying to pass. Then his father died. No warning, no last words, just gone. And with him, the very axis Amir had built his life around. At first, we thought he was grieving, but grief alone doesn't rewrite a soul. What came next was something else entirely. He vanished. No social media, no calls, no responses to group texts, just silence, for months. Then, one night he appeared. A team dinner, no announcement, just there. Same face, different presence. His eyes were heavier but grounded, his voice softer but clearer. He smiled, but not to please. It was the kind of smile that made you feel like you were being watched, not judged, but seen. And when someone asked him, "Where have you been?" Amir simply said, "I spent my whole life trying to be who others needed me to be. Then I lost the one person I was trying to prove myself to, and I didn't know who I was anymore." That moment still haunts me, because it wasn't sadness I saw in him, it was depth. He hadn't broken down, he had broken in, into truth, into silence, into himself. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the sacred, painful journey of becoming who you truly are, not who the world expects. It's not self-improvement, it's self-retrieval. And the toll? High. You lose your old masks, old roles, old comfort. But you gain something rarer, alignment between your soul and your surface. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Amir's disappearance wasn't a breakdown. It was a quiet rebellion against the false life he'd been performing. What looked like retreat was a rite of passage. He had walked into his grief and come back not with answers, but with presence. And here's what most people never understand. Real transformation is not loud. It's not a motivational speech or a reinvention announcement on LinkedIn. It's subtle, uncomfortable, lonely. Sometimes people will think you've changed for the worse because they miss the version of you that made them comfortable. But the friend who changed overnight, he wasn't gone. He had just gone inward. And what he brought back was real. You didn't choose the dream. It chose you. Maybe you were walking through your childhood home only to find the doors sealed shut, or you were searching for someone in a foggy train station, shouting their name, but no sound came out. Or maybe, like a woman I once knew, you were climbing a steep hill with a suitcase in your hand. You opened it again and again, desperate to find something valuable inside, but it was always empty. And when she woke up, tears ran down her face before she could explain why. Carl Jung believed that dreams are not random. They are messengers from the unconscious, symbols meant to reveal what your waking ego refuses to see. He once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That woman, she had spent years dragging the weight of others' expectations, parents, partners, co-workers, hoping for their love, their praise. But every time she opened the suitcase, all she found was emptiness. Her dream didn't tell her what to do. It simply showed her what was true, that the life she was carrying wasn't hers. Dreams often seem strange, chaotic, surreal. But that's because the unconscious speaks in symbols, not sentences. It doesn't argue with you, it shows you. A snake in a dream might represent your repressed rage. A locked room might be your inner child, trapped and ignored. A collapsing bridge, the brittle path you've built between your outer image and inner truth. Jung called dreams the royal road to the unconscious, because in them, the shadow, the part of you you try to forget, walks freely, sometimes in disguise, sometimes in plain sight. I remember a man who once dreamed he was on stage, giving a speech with no words coming out. He told me, "It was like I was being punished for something I didn't do." In therapy, we traced that dream back to years of emotional suppression. His job rewarded him for being agreeable, polite, soft-spoken. But inside, he was filled with buried resentment and silent defiance. The dream didn't shame him. It invited him to reclaim his voice. He later confessed, "That dream scared me awake." And that's what dreams do. They scare you into truth. They whisper what your waking self is too busy, too polite, too scared to admit. They remind you that the life you're living might not be the one your soul chose. That's why some dreams feel heavier than nightmares. Because they're not about monsters under the bed. They're about the ones you let live quietly in your heart. If you're feeling tired lately, deeper than physical, slower than emotional, it might be because your unconscious is knocking. It's trying to speak and you've been silencing it with productivity, scrolling, small talk, or survival. But the body remembers. The soul remembers. And when they've been ignored long enough, they send a dream that wakes you, not just from sleep, but from illusion. You can pretend for a long time until your body decides it won't play along anymore. At first, it's subtle, a headache that lingers, a stomach that knots every morning, sleepless nights that come out of nowhere. But slowly, it escalates. Your smile starts twitching at meetings. You laugh on cue, but your chest feels hollow. You say, "I'm fine," so often, the words feel like sand in your mouth. You watch yourself from a distance, like an actor stuck in a scene you never auditioned for. Carl Jung warned us, We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. But there's one disguise that becomes the most dangerous, the one you wear too well. The persona. The persona is the mask we create to survive the world. Polite, agreeable, competent, smiling. It helps us fit in, win approval, avoid rejection, but it's not who we are. It's who we became to be safe. Over time, this mask fuses with our identity. We forget it's a mask at all until something inside starts to rebel. Jung said the danger lies not in having a persona, but in believing we are only the persona. When the gap between who we are and who we pretend to be grows too wide, the psyche collapses. That collapse rarely begins with a dramatic breakdown. It begins with a slow withdrawal. A kind man starts snapping at his kids. A thoughtful woman becomes numb during conversations. A talented employee stops caring about their work. Take Julian, for instance, a calm, reliable manager at a logistics firm. Everyone saw him as the rock, steady, composed, always helpful. But Julian hadn't felt joy in 3 years. Every Monday felt like a funeral for his real self. Then, one morning, he couldn't get out of bed, not because he was physically ill, but because he couldn't pretend anymore. He stared at his phone as it rang with meetings and messages and let it ring. That was the moment his real self spoke louder than his role. "I'm not okay," he whispered. And for the first time in his adult life, he meant it. The exhaustion Julian felt wasn't from overwork. It was from overacting. His persona had become a prison. He had smiled while grieving, said yes while screaming no, showed up when all he wanted was to disappear, and his body, loyal and patient, finally broke the silence. That fatigue, that ache, that invisible weight, that was his soul leaking the truth through his skin. He didn't need more sleep. He needed more truth. There's a quiet irony here. Society rewards the persona. You get praised for being strong, agreeable, selfless, but it never asks if that strength is costing your sanity. It never wonders if your helpfulness is rooted in fear. And by the time people say, "You seem off lately," you've already drowned. What looks like a breakdown to the outside world is often a breakthrough on the inside. The real you, the self buried under roles and rules, has finally started to fight back. Jung believed that when we are unable to reconcile our inner self with our outer performance, the psyche revolts. The revolt comes not as rage, but as fatigue, as sorrow without reason, as an unwillingness to keep playing the part. That's the moment you can't fake it anymore. That's when your false self fractures and the fragments begin to fall away. Painful, yes. Confusing, deeply. But necessary? Absolutely. Here's what no one tells you. The exhaustion you're feeling might not be a sign that you're failing. It might be a sign that you're finally waking up from the illusion that approval equals worth, waking up from the lie that success is louder than suffering, waking up from a life performed instead of lived. So if you feel tired, beyond sleep, beyond reason, pause. Listen. What part of you is done pretending? What truth have you buried under politeness and performance? The soul, Jung said, will whisper first. Then it will ache. And finally, if you don't listen, it will collapse your life just to get your attention. That collapse may look like the end. But it's really the beginning. They say, keep it together. They say, stay strong. But no one warns you what it costs to always be the one who holds everything in. Let me tell you a story. There was a man named Idris. Calm, polite, dependable. Everyone at the firm called him the anchor. He never raised his voice, never complained, always smiled, always said yes. But there was something strange about Idris. He seemed distant, as if a part of him had checked out years ago. At first, people thought it was wisdom, but when he fainted during a morning meeting, they discovered it wasn't stress from overwork. It was emotional fatigue. His body was shutting down because his mind had spent years suppressing grief, rage, shame, and guilt he was never allowed to express. Carl Jung warned us, what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. The problem with repressed emotions is that they don't just go away. They go underground, into your shadow, and the longer they stay hidden, the more power they gain. You think you're in control, but really, you're just spending all your energy pretending. Like holding a beach ball underwater, it takes constant tension, vigilance, strength, and the moment you get tired or distracted, it bursts up with force. Jung called this the return of the repressed. It's when the emotions we've buried come back, not as feelings, but as symptoms. Sudden anger at small things, panic without cause, emotional numbness, aches that doctors can't explain. That's the psychic price of hiding who you are. Idris later told me in therapy he realized something strange. Every time someone said, "You're so calm," he felt a strange mix of pride and panic. Pride because it meant he was in control. Panic because he was terrified they'd find out it was all an act. He had trained himself not to feel anger because as a child, anger was punished. So he became the good boy. But he paid with his aliveness. "I forgot how to feel joy too," he said. Because you can't numb one feeling, you numb them all. This is where the persona, the social mask, becomes a prison. You think you're wearing it to survive. But one day, you wake up and realize you don't know who you are without it. That's not peace. That's paralysis, and it shows up in your fatigue. You're not just tired because of your job, or your kids, or your schedule. You're tired because your soul is screaming behind a wall of silence, and silence is heavy. One night, Idris finally broke. Not publicly. Alone. He screamed into a pillow. He cried for the father who never hugged him. He punched a cushion and let out every no he had swallowed since childhood. And the next day, he didn't feel broken. He felt lighter. For the first time in years, he didn't need a nap at noon because he had stopped hiding. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the journey of becoming whole, not perfect. It requires honesty. And honesty takes energy, but repression takes more. Much more. If you're constantly tired, ask yourself, what have I never been allowed to feel? Because chances are that emotion isn't gone. It's hiding, and it's heavy. So be careful before you praise someone for never getting angry. Sometimes, the people who seem the most calm are the ones closest to collapse. Because what looks like peace might be exhaustion in disguise. You don't hate them, you hate what they reflect. That's the brutal truth about projection. You're not just annoyed by someone's arrogance, coldness, or loudness. You're unsettled by what it awakens in you. Carl Jung described projection as the unconscious transfer of our own unwanted traits onto others. Instead of seeing people as they are, we see them as distorted mirrors, holding up pieces of ourselves that we've disowned. And here's the problem. We spend our lives trying to fix the mirror, but never fix what it's showing. Imagine this. A man named Ferris always described his manager as a power-hungry micromanager. Every team meeting, every email, Ferris would roll his eyes. He just wants control, he'd say. But during a conflict mediation session, something slipped. When asked what he feared most at work, Ferris whispered, losing control. That was the key. His hatred wasn't just about his boss, it was about the deep, hidden part of himself, terrified of being helpless, of feeling irrelevant, of admitting vulnerability. His projection had turned his fear into a villain he could blame. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And once you see this, projection becomes less about blame and more about revelation. The world stops being full of enemies and starts becoming full of clues. Your ex wasn't just selfish. Maybe they had boundaries you never learned to set. That loud colleague isn't just annoying. Maybe they expressed joy you don't permit yourself to feel. One woman I met, Alina, used to call her friend self-centered because he always said no to weekend plans. But later, she realized she'd never given herself permission to rest. What she envied as selfishness was actually self-respect. The exhaustion of projection is subtle but real. It's not just emotional, it's spiritual. You spend hours rehearsing arguments in your head, building invisible cases against people who should know better. But really, it's your own unmet needs, unhealed fears, and silenced traits demanding attention. Projection is a loop of externalizing what's internal. You think you're defending yourself, but you're really avoiding yourself. That's why it's so tiring. It's a war with your reflection. And sometimes, projection disguises itself as moral superiority. You call someone immature, fake, or narcissistic. But often, that's your shadow, talking the part of you that's jealous, the part that wants freedom but doesn't know how to ask, the part that judges because it's scared. It's hard to admit this, especially if you've built your identity on being the good one, the strong one, the selfless one. But the people who trigger you most might be showing you what you buried first. And here's where the transformation begins. Not in correcting others, but in correcting your vision. You start asking, why does this bother me so much? What part of me is speaking right now? Instead of snapping back, you turn inward. And every time you do, a piece of your true self is retrieved from the shadows. Individuation, Jung's term for the journey toward wholeness, requires this relentless honesty. It requires standing in front of the mirror, not with judgment, but with curiosity. So next time someone irritates you, pause, breathe, ask, what part of me do they represent? What am I seeing that I refuse to own? The answer won't be easy. It may sting, but it will free you, because every time you reclaim a projection, you reclaim energy. You stop leaking power into false enemies, you stop chasing ghosts, and you start becoming whole. Sometimes you're not just tired, you're tired of being who you think you have to be. There's a kind of fatigue that doesn't come from physical work or lack of sleep. It comes from playing the same role for too long. Carl Jung believed that within each of us are ancient patterns, archetypes that shape how we behave, feel, and relate to others. The warrior, the caregiver, the hero, the victim. These aren't just stories from myths. They live inside your psyche. But here's the danger. When you become fused with just one, you forget that you're more than a role. And that forgetfulness is exhausting. I once knew a man named Theo, a respected hospital director, beloved by his staff, admired for his endless availability. If a crisis happened at 2 a.m., he was there. If someone else broke down, he stepped in. He was, by all appearances, the archetypal caregiver, always giving, always present, always reliable. But slowly, something in him began to falter. He couldn't concentrate in meetings. He snapped at a nurse for the first time in 14 years. He forgot his own birthday. When his wife asked him, "When was the last time someone took care of you?" He had no answer. That night, Theo broke down, not because something new had gone wrong, but because his one-dimensional role had been silently bleeding him dry for years. Jung warned us about this. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And to accept oneself completely means acknowledging that you are not just the warrior, or the savior, or the protector. You are also the one who cries, the one who rests, the one who fails and asks for help, the lover, the innocent, the sage. Archetypes are powerful because they're universal, but they're also prisons when you lock yourself inside just one. In Theo's case, healing didn't come from resigning or escaping. It came from shifting, letting himself become the receiver, asking for a sabbatical, admitting to his team that he was struggling, sitting in silence with his own grief, grief he had buried beneath years of doing. That vulnerability didn't make him weaker, it made him whole. Because in Jungian psychology, the goal isn't to become perfect, it's to become integrated, to welcome all parts of the self, even the ones you've ignored or shamed. That is individuation. The process of becoming who you truly are, not just who you've performed to be. Here's the irony. The more tightly you hold on to one archetype, the more life will eventually pull it away. The warrior will face a battle he cannot win. The hero will fall from grace. The father will face a moment where he feels like a lost child. These breakdowns are not failures. They are invitations into the rest of your psyche, into roles you forgot you had the right to embody. And it's not comfortable. It's confusing, but that confusion is a sign that something real is happening. You're moving beyond a single role and towards something far more human. So if you're tired, it might not be because you're weak. It might be because one part of you has carried the entire story for too long. Silence has a way of creeping into your life at the exact moment you've run out of ways to pretend. It doesn't ask for permission. It arrives like a shadow slipping through the doorway, settling beside you, insisting you pay attention. At first, you think something is wrong. You feel distant from friends, unmotivated to socialize, uninterested in small talk. But beneath that discomfort lies a truth Jung understood well. When the psyche begins to transform, it demands solitude not as punishment, but as purification. This is the moment when your outer world dims so your inner world can finally speak. Jung often called this the threshold of individuation, the point where your true self begins to rise from the depths, and rising is never gentle. It pulls you inward, away from noise, away from obligation, away from the persona you've worn for decades. I knew a man named Ravi, a team manager everyone described as the friendly one. He smiled through stress, soothed office conflicts, and carried burdens no one ever asked him to. But one year, after losing a major project, he stopped showing up to after-work gatherings. He ignored texts. He spent evenings alone in a quiet apartment with the lights off. His colleagues whispered that he was depressed. They didn't know that for the first time in his life he was listening to himself. This is the irony. People think you're withdrawing from them, when in reality, you're returning to yourself. Ravi later confessed he wasn't sad. He was awakening. He realized he had spent years performing a role, the pleaser archetype, until his own desires had gone silent. The stillness he sought wasn't loneliness. It was recovery. It was the soul pulling him toward the truths he had ignored beneath layers of politeness. Jung wrote, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." And this is the mystery. During these quiet seasons, even language feels too small. You can't explain what's changing because you don't yet have the words for who you're becoming. In the silence, your shadow begins to stir, the anger you swallowed, the needs you minimized, the voice you muted. At first, it scares you. You wonder why old wounds suddenly ache again, why memories you buried rise like ghosts at midnight. But that resurfacing is not regression. It's restoration. The psyche is bringing the forgotten forward so the real you can step into the light without the weight of unspoken pain. This is why silence feels heavy, not empty. It's full of everything you've avoided. The deeper irony is that during this time, people misjudge you the most. They think you're pulling away from life. But the truth is, life is pulling you towards something more honest, something raw, something sacred. As days pass, the silence becomes a teacher, showing you which relationships drain you, which dreams still matter, which fears still hold power over you. You begin to see patterns you were blind to before. You start noticing the gap between the persona you show the world and the person you are when no one is watching. This stage often marks the beginning of individuation, the path back to yourself. But few recognize it because it hides beneath quiet evenings, unanswered calls, and long pauses where words used to be. What feels like retreat is actually revelation, gathering strength. What looks like decline is the psyche preparing you for the next chapter, and what seems like exhaustion is actually your soul clearing space for truth. Silence is not the enemy. It is the doorway. And once you step through it, nothing you hear inside yourself will ever be the same. You wake up tired. Even after sleeping through the night, you turn off the blue lights, you drink herbal tea, you do everything right, yet every morning feels like you've run a marathon in your mind. Why? Because sometimes the real reason you're exhausted has nothing to do with your body and everything to do with your soul. Jung believed the unconscious never rests. While your body lies still, your psyche keeps searching for truth, for wholeness, for release. And if your daytime self is a mask, if your persona hides your pain, your desires, your rage, then your dreams become the battleground where your shadow fights to be seen. You don't sleep. You wrestle. You don't rest. You reveal. Imagine this. A man named Elliot, 42, married, 2 kids, stable job. He's never missed a deadline, always smiles, always agrees everyone calls him such a good guy. But every morning he wakes up feeling like someone poured cement into his spine. His eyes burn. His heart is tight. Doctors say he's healthy. Blood tests say he's fine. But Elliot isn't fine, because by day he plays a role so well he's forgotten it is a role. And by night his dreams scream what he refuses to admit, that he's angry, that he feels invisible, that he wants to quit his job, leave the city, and paint, like he did before he gave everything up for security. In one dream, he's running down a hallway that keeps stretching longer. In another, he's holding a screaming child he can't soothe. Elliot wakes up sweating, ashamed. He tells no one. But every night his unconscious keeps trying to wake him up. Not with alarms, but with symbols, with metaphors. With exhaustion, Jung taught that dreams are the guiding words of the soul. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When people live out of sync with their true selves, the mind doesn't shut down at night, it tries harder to get through. That's why so many feel drained even after rest. Your unconscious becomes the janitor of your soul, cleaning up everything your persona tries to hide, and the deeper the lie you live by day, the louder the psyche screams at night. This is the hidden cost of misalignment. Sleep stops being healing, it becomes survival. I once met a therapist at a retreat who told me something I never forgot. She said, half my clients come in complaining about fatigue, but the real problem is they're living a life they don't belong in. That hit me, because it's not just about jobs or relationships, it's about truth. The truth you're avoiding, the conversation you won't have, the version of yourself you locked away years ago because it wasn't convenient, wasn't safe, wasn't acceptable. But while you hide it, your soul doesn't forget, and your soul doesn't stop speaking. The archetypes inside you, the child, the rebel, the artist, the sage, they all want a voice. And if you silence them during the day, they'll scream in your dreams. They'll fill your nights with visions that confuse you, exhaust you, even scare you, but they're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to free you. The fatigue that doesn't go away is not physical, it's existential. There's a moment no one talks about until it happens to you, a quiet, explosive second when your soul rebels against the life you've been performing. It could be as simple as canceling a dinner with friends you no longer relate to, or as dramatic as slamming your resignation letter onto a desk you once dreamed of reaching. It might look like rage to others. To you, it feels like falling apart. But that's not what's really happening. What's breaking isn't you. What's breaking is the mask. Carl Jung believed that the persona, the face we wear to meet the world, is necessary but dangerously addictive. You start by playing the role to survive. Then one day, the role replaces you, the agreeable employee, the dependable friend, the unshakable father, the overachieving son, the smiling partner. You become a polished version of what others need, but it costs your essence. And then, the moment arrives. You can't keep nodding. You can't keep swallowing. Something ancient and unfiltered erupts from within. And you think it's a breakdown. It's not. It's the soul pulling the emergency brake. Take Anthony, a 47-year-old operations director. Known for being calm under pressure, Anthony was the glue that held his team, family, and friendships together. He said yes to everything, volunteered for every crisis, took the fall for things he didn't cause. People called him reliable, even saintly. But what they didn't know was that Anthony hadn't had a real opinion in 5 years. He hadn't said no in 10. One Thursday, during a client presentation, someone snapped at him publicly. Something shifted. He looked down at his own trembling hands and said loudly, "I'm done." Then he walked out. No explanation, no goodbye. Colleagues thought he'd lost his mind, but Jung would say he found himself. What broke wasn't his sanity, it was the cage. Jung called this process the confrontation with the self, where the I finally meets the unconscious, often through emotional collapse. "There is no coming to consciousness without pain," he wrote. "And the pain of breaking isn't because you're weak, it's because you were strong for too long in a version of you that was never whole. That crying spell in the bathroom, that panic in the grocery aisle, that numbness on your birthday. Those are not signs of failure. They are the pressure valve opening. They are the soul saying, 'This version of me cannot continue. I want to live.' The real mystery is that this breaking point often comes at the peak of your success. Just when you finally built the life you thought you wanted, career, family, recognition, that's when the cracks begin. Dramatic irony unfolds. Everything looks perfect on the outside, but inside, the shadow is pacing. And when it finally takes the stage, it doesn't ask for permission. It floods, it demands. It ruins the play so the truth can speak. Because here's the truth. The day you finally break is not your downfall. It's your emergence. Your body, your soul, your psyche, they are conspiring for your wholeness. What feels like collapse is transformation. You are not breaking down. You are breaking open. You are not failing. You are being reformed. The self is tired of being buried under roles, and it's using pain to call you back. So yes, you may lose things when you snap, the job, the approval, the friend who liked you better. Quiet, but you will gain something that cannot be taken again. Your truth. And truth is heavy, yes, but it's also light. Because carrying who you really are is easier than dragging around who you're not. The world may never celebrate this moment, but your soul will never forget it. You don't always notice the moment when the weight begins to shift, but you feel it, like waking up after a long illness. There's a quiet clarity in your chest, a strange softness where the war used to be. This is not peace as in no more problems. This is peace as in no more pretending. After the journey through the shadow, the collapse of the persona, the painful awareness of your projections, in the silence that taught you how to listen, you arrive here. Not triumphant, but transformed. Something inside has changed its shape. And the world feels new, not because it has changed, but because you finally have. Carl Jung believed the goal of life was not perfection, but individuation, becoming whole by integrating all parts of yourself. Most people confuse wholeness with happiness, but Jung warned us. There is no light without shadow, and no psychic wholeness without imperfection. To arrive at this final stage is not to feel fixed. It's to feel real. You've dropped the roles you used to play. You've let the old defenses fall, and the exhaustion that once haunted your mornings begins to dissolve, not overnight, not in a single breath, but slowly, like fog rising from a lake as the sun warms the surface. Let me tell you about Idris, a corporate strategist I once knew. On paper, he had everything: status, wealth, admiration, but he was always tired, always reaching. One day, during a merger crisis, something broke. A colleague blamed him publicly, and instead of defending himself, Idris stayed silent. Later, he said, "I realized I wasn't even angry. I just didn't want to play the game anymore." That was the first time he spoke from his self, not his role. Over months, he started speaking less in meetings, but when he did, people listened more. His energy changed, not louder, just clearer. He no longer micromanaged, no longer needed to be liked. One executive asked, "What happened to you?" And Idris replied, "Nothing happened. I just stopped performing." That's what this new energy is. It's not adrenaline. It's not the rush of being admired or achieving something external. It's deeper. It's the current of authenticity that flows when your inner world is no longer at war with itself. You start to trust your instincts again. You stop over-explaining. You realize you don't owe people versions of yourself that no longer exist. The people who relied on your mask may pull away. That's okay. The ones who stay are the ones who can hold your truth. There's a dramatic irony in the final stage of becoming. You searched for answers outside, books, titles, mentors, roles, but the whole time it was your buried self calling from within. Not the loud, perfect self. The quiet one. The real one. And now, as you walk forward, you understand something you couldn't before. Your spiritual tiredness wasn't a flaw. It was a signal, a sacred signal. It was never your body alone that needed rest. It was your soul that needed permission to exist. Carl Jung never promised that this process would be easy, but he did promise it would be meaningful. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that's the truth hiding in your tiredness. The life you thought was breaking you was actually rebuilding you. You may still feel echoes of the old weight. You may still slip into masks. That's human. But now you have met the truth. You have felt the ground beneath the illusion, and nothing, not even fear, can fully undo that knowing. The real you has arrived, not polished, not perfect, but whole. You understand now, spiritual tiredness was never the enemy. It was the signal. The signal that you are shedding your false self and becoming who you were always meant to be. Carl Jung didn't promise comfort, but he promised truth, and truth, though heavy at first, always leads to freedom. The tiredness is fading because the real you is finally arriving.